pink screens are supposed to be lovely, lovely and the camera side, red with white text. So bear with me. So today I am giving a presentation on RBM versus rbenv, or rbenv, however you'd like to pronounce it. And right there, I'm Hagstrom. So let us begin. So we'll just start off really simple here. We'll say, what is RBM? What does that mean to me, a beginner who has no idea? Well, shortly the acronym stands for Ruby Environment Manager, not Ruby Version Manager. Yeah, they changed that. Okay. And it's also a tool used to install and manage multiple versions of Ruby, as well as creating these cool gem enclosures that we'll probably get into later on. And then the next thing would be, okay, well we have RBM, or Environment Manager. What is rbenv? And why is it useful in this case? Well, you could say that one of the major differences between these two is that it's a more modular approach to a version manager versus RBM that tries to do it all. And basically, shortly put, it's another tool used to install, manage, and create gem enclosures. But as you notice, there are two asterisks there. Now, if anyone read the little footnote at the bottom, what does that say?
Needs a
That's right. And that would mean that it's probably going to require you to brew install something if you're on the Mac, or git clone some type of plugin into your directory. But we'll get into that. That's jumping a little ahead. So, who should use these tools? Anyone know? Well, you don't have to know. I'll tell you. It's you. You need to use these tools. But if you want to get more detail, as probably someone will poke at me too, probably Ruby developers who need to manage those multiple versions of Ruby, and who also need to create these gem enclosures, or as I say, environments on their development machine. So, someone as a beginner as myself asked, okay, coming from no background in programming and jumping straight into Ruby, you told me that I should use this, but why should I use this? Is there a specific reason why? Well, someone has put in an article would say, environment managers take away a lot of the pain that you can experience in development. And if you don't want me to repeat exactly what the text says here, it basically to me means that a lot of times we're going to be working as developers on multiple clients or multiple projects, and we don't want to probably be switching around manually all these versions of Ruby, getting confused, like, oh, now I got to make it uninstall this, and then make it install that, you know, but with one of these tools, we can automate a lot of the processes of installing Ruby, and we can create safe, well-guarded environments and make us feel comfortable with ourselves. I feel comfortable with myself. Well, then I assumed, okay, well, let's install both. Let's jump on my computer, and let's install RBM first. We'll use a little curl command to get that set up. That'll take roughly 10 minutes. And then we'll go ahead and start rbenv or rbenv, and we'll notice that you should not have done that. And there's a reason why. Because these tools are so similar, and they're trying to accomplish the same job, there's probably a good chance that, unknown to me, there's something underneath the sheets was going on, that they're both trying to control something, and I have to choose one or the other. So from this point on, we're going to assume that there's two universes of me. One that shows RBM, and one that shows rbenv. And we'll go on from there. Okay, and just for everyone else that's using Ubuntu or Windows and has not had brew for rbenv, we do have a way of git cloning that as a plugin, just as a fair slide. But anyways, on to the separate universes. Okay, so using these tools, right? Probably first question for both tools, how do I switch Ruby versions? How am I going to accomplish this feat in front of me? Well, we'll get to that. What is a gemset? Well, a gemset is what I mentioned before, that gem enclosure. So we'll be getting to that as well. And then very last, are there any other tips and tricks? Of course, there's many tips. I only cover a few, but we'll get there. So switching versions. Okay, let's jump from this universe to the left universe, which is the one that chose RBM. So in our RBM, or before we install RBM, we jump in our terminal, and we say, okay, RBM install x.x.x. Well, that would probably come out to something of numerics, 1.9.3 maybe 2.0.0. And then if I didn't include this, but you can almost add a patch version at the end of that if you wanted to. And then once you have that installed, and after that's taken 10 hours to go, you can type in rbenv that specific version that you want. Now, that's really nice. So you probably have, if you're using a Mac, the default version of Ruby is probably something like 1.8.7. And you're noticing all these forums and all these articles talking about 2.0 is brilliantly fast, and anyone still using 1.8 is, oh, right? So you probably see that, and maybe some people will outright defend that. But maybe you want to use both, or you don't want a virtual machine or something. This is how you get at least your terminal session to recognize how to use a different version. But going to the next universe, we use rbenv now. We're going to basically do something very similar, and the syntax is pretty much the same, except we change our RBM for rbenv, and we add Ruby dash to our version number. And then we set the rbenv local to version number. Now that's awesome. Now we both have, each tool, a way of switching versions. Oh, can anyone see that footnote still? There's another asterisk there, right? What do you guys think that means? It's right there. The Ruby build package is needed for compiling. So compiling in this case means when I install for rbenv, I need that package in there. If I don't have that package, I can't do this fancy automated way of doing it. I need to independently install Ruby myself. And then I can type in rbenv local ecdocs, right? Just as a disclaimer, so you're not confused. Okay, so now we're on to those gem enclosures, those gemsets that I was talking about. Now, very first question, what is a gemset? Well, I have copy and pasted a well definition of this and refactored a little bit so it's not plain out plagiarism. And I've just summarized it as, for myself, it's a nice way to put up fences in the yard. It's a community for all of your projects, and it's a neighborhood, it's an ecosystem. And now, we're not one of those neighborhoods that I share my backyard with you, okay? This is not happening. I'm putting up a wall, a brick wall, an impenetrable wall. And in this form, I'm gonna say a gem set. I want my projects to have possibly a gem set to encompass my gems. So my gems don't touch my other gems, and they don't touch other gems, and we don't have this whole sharing thing going on. But you might also have pointed out, if you are a Rails person or any Ruby aficionado that's kept up with pace, Bundler has something to say about these gem sets. Bundler probably has a lot to say about maybe we don't need these things anymore. And I say, ha, we'll get to that later, but no. It probably is a good case to say that they're not necessary, but I like to be very secure with myself, and I don't know Bundler that well. And I haven't taken the time to learn that, honestly. So I will probably still be using Gemsets, and maybe you will too for starting out. But look into Bundler. Okay, so getting to know how to use these things. Configuration. RBM is pretty simple syntax. I even customize it a little bit just to be a little tricky. We type in RBM, the version number we want, and the gemset name that we want it to have. And then you throw in an argument there, or a flag, and you say --create. And what that will do is it will check your system, see if you already have a gemset, or gemset for that specific Ruby version. And if you don't, it will create it automatically for you, and you won't have to ask it. And I believe it also will probably jump in and just start using that right off the bat, but I'm not too sure about that one. And then on our next universe, the one that is parallel to ours, we have rbenv's way of doing it. Which, again, we notice another asterisk here. And we see the pattern that rbenv presents to us. It's not fully encompassing like RBM. It's not the big, everything in the kitchen sink, everything but the kitchen sink, that's right. But it might even have the kitchen sink, because it's that big. And I might be using that term out of phrase. But regardless, you still need another package called rbenv gemset. And what that will let you do is create gemsets for rbenv. But they probably do recommend that you use that thing called Bundler, that I had not learned, to basically accomplish the same thing. Okay, sweet. So now that I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I'm going to just pull it back. I see the timer is a little too far out for me. And I'm going to say environment files are probably one of my favorite things, learning this. Back when I was getting into Ruby programming, I kind of came from Python first. And I noticed that there was this thing called virtual wrapper that made it really interesting for me to like have all my packages like separated from each other in each project. So I was looking, okay, that's the Pythonista way of doing things. What's the Rubyist way? How do I accomplish this in a Ruby where everything I CD into a directory is done? There's no confusion of where I'm at in my terminal. It knows deep down in the soul of souls that this is what I'm supposed to be using. And this is how. I type in RBM. Oh, it's also excuse that there's no example with rbenv. It's pretty similar. We use the same files, but RBM's way of doing it would be to say RBM, the version number, at the gemset name, and then say -- create, then -- RBMRC. Now, when I was first learning this, I only noticed one pattern in this, and is that every single file that had to do with some type of configuration settings that was foreign to me and hidden in Mac for me was this damn RC file thing that's going on here. Now, there was a bash RC, and there was even a Z shell RC, and I bet there's a fish RC in there as well. But I noticed whatever RC means, it means something to do with my configuration, and I knew that's what it probably was doing. So upon creating this, I CD into my directory, I find that file, and I notice that's exactly what it's doing. It's setting up a nice environment file for me to when I actually enter that directory, I'll be able to, my terminal will be able to know that, hey, this is disconnected. We'll wait for that to
go to sleep.
Yeah, I went to sleep apparently. Okay, so nothing's improved, but we're able to set up an environment file, correct? That's where we left off, right? So what's nice about environment files to anyone that's used RVM or RVM? Does anyone have an opinion about it right now, or suggest me on stage? Apparently so. But so to me, an environment file is really nice because I don't have to type in RVM use or blah 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 to set something on my current session. That's beautiful to me. It's carefree. And just to make it even nicer, I decided to convert that nice configuration file to a .ruby-version. And what that will do is I will take that configuration file, change it into two separate files. It's a nice .ruby version, which using one of these tools like rbenv or rbenv, it will read that file and change a global variable for you, in the case of rbenv and chruby, I believe, and let it know that this is the version of Ruby that we're going to be using in this path, and for the rest of the paths underneath this path until it sees another type of file. And then the ruby-gemset file will let you know which gemset it's going to be using, which is great. It's fantastic. And as you can see, I even mocked up a little bit of some results here about seeding and out, seeding back in. It's beautiful. Favorite part. But just like most research, it's not all cake and donuts and milk, you know? It's not all sweet. There gets a little part of to be bitter about these things, about these tools. And, you know, if you recall, I volunteered for this, and David outright recommended that I should look into a separate tool besides these tools. So that was my first hint, knowing that there's probably a good reason why he doesn't like either of these tools. So, just before I actually get to the slide, this is kind of my progression. I looked at RVM, and I was like, damn, it's nice. And then I looked at rbenv, and I was like, whoa, that's even nicer. And then I looked at why those two things were lacking, and then I saw some of other tools like chruby, and I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? Using these things? I mean, the skeleton's in the closet, definitely, with both of these. And we'll start with RVM. Okay, so the first thing I didn't know, as probably no one really does know when they first start, is that overrides or hooks into your cd and gem command. Now, those are pretty popular commands to us, right? Pretty damn popular. They override them. They hook right into those suckers. I don't even know this. And if they told me, I didn't read it. It also makes them take longer, or just outright slower. Now, that's to me an exaggeration, of course. Like, take this with a grain of salt. But apparently there are benchmarks to prove that it's around 50 milliseconds slower.
Right.
And that's outrageous. I mean, 50 milliseconds upon each command. I mean, I can't even sleep.
They also can't notice it.
After 100 uses, 1.5 seconds of your life.
Exactly.
Never notice.
I'm reminded every night when I go to bed, so I notice that. It also has very big trust issues. Now, this is kind of vague, but it is true that when you create an RVM or a C file, and you CD out and you CD back in, it's going to ask you a very important question that will set the course for the rest of your friendship and possible relationship down the path. It says yes or no to you. It gives you an ultimatum to choose whether or not to agree to its terms of use. Which doesn't, it's not really common with your .ruby version file. And so once I do say yes, and I think, okay, we can move past this now, it's slanting. Every time I go back into the directory, it's slanting, bright yellow text saying, hey, this is the agreement we made. Just so you know, we're using this and this. And that's nice, but if I wanted to know, I think I would probably check. But it makes me know, it makes me want to know. And then there's rbenv. Now, as you notice, that progression was rvm, which I thought was fantastic. And then when I started to see rbenv, I was just like, whoa, they have a whole page, so why choose them over rvm? A whole page of like negatives against rvm. But then I started to look at what rbenv was doing, and I kind of looked around, and this is arguable that this is a negative. But it creates these things called shims, which I've had to look around a little bit to really understand what a shim does. Because I'm still a beginner. I have a beginner's mind, definitely. And shims probably wrap most of your gems for rbenv. I say most because there's some gems that just don't have any commands. They don't have anything that you need to really wrap. But these suckers will wrap them tight. They will take every gem that you have and create a nice executable that gets stored in a separate path of yours. And then when you make a call with your command, it will go out, go to that directory, check the executable, and then come back to you with the correct command that you were expecting. Now again, that's kind of weird. I never experienced this, and maybe it's not weird to more experienced guys because they accepted this and have atoned for this, but this is still weird to me.
What's the key reason for that?
But then we get on to the same thing. All my executions are now longer. And I still dream about it.
I can't help that.
And it's probably around the same thing, 50 milliseconds. But now it's probably most of your commands instead of just a few, or literally 2 in this case that I've showcased.
Actually, I think it's 45, so the rbenv has a
There we go, I was wrong. But also, along with this shim dilemma, we have this this thing called rehash, which goes hand in hand with shims. Every time you bundle install something that may have a gem command, you have to rehash. And that, I mean, again, this is probably the most biased slide you'll have ever seen. But I definitely feel that's a little weird, like coming into this where rbenv is probably all automated and I don't even know, and then finding out that rbenv is secretly hooking into things that I don't want it to maybe hook into, but it's probably okay. And then rbenv apparently is making shims and everywhere, like in like that one directory. I don't even know what a shim is. And then I have to rehash, or else it breaks, and I don't get my shims. So rehashing in what rbenv says is that you want to, every time you gem install a gem that has a possible command, to rehash, so it but it creates a shim or an executable for that gem. And then if you're using possibly Gemsets or other environment files, I'm pretty sure it will folder structure for you so you have certain executables for certain things. But that's still really foreign to me. It's still kind of weird using the willies. However, I spent a lot of time deliberating over this last slide here, and it's definitely biased, as you can see. But there is a new challenger, and in big, bold white letters, or slightly faded, we'll see that Chruby, as recommended by David, is here. And what this new kid on the block, as I say, is that it's trying to keep things simple and clean. Now, whether that's true or not, we'll come to show. But it's definitely one of those Ruby version managers to watch out for. Now, I didn't do a ton of research on this last guy because it seemed pretty straightforward. And basically, what it tries to say is that it does one thing. Just like rbenv is supposed to do just one thing from out of the box, which is change your Ruby versions. And the reason why this is nicer, in some people's opinions, was because it doesn't use shims in the case of, it doesn't create all these executables that go in other paths. It just changes your environment path to Ruby, I believe. And then that's pretty much it. That's a really simple way of doing it. And that's why, as to this date, Ruby Foo and Ruby versions, possibly growing in popularity before chruby, have deprecated themselves out of the sheer awesomeness, apparently, of chruby, which I'm not quite sure if that's true, but it will come to show that this seems like another competitor in the space of Ruby version managers. Okay, now, this is kind of, like, these slides have been kind of asking me questions, and it can also be a question for everyone out in the crowd. What's your opinion? What's your deep-seated opinion about these things? Like, Brian hassling me about the 50 milliseconds that he cares. So,
well, one practical concern I have a lot is that if you're using RVM and you need to install the latest version of Ruby, you usually have to update RVM first, because RVM is the thing that builds Ruby, and it needs to know how to build that latest version of Ruby. So right away, just because you're updating RVM to install the latest version of Ruby, you might be having some effect on all your other Ruby environments. Whereas with chruby, it's pretty simple, and you're the person in charge of installing Ruby, so you pretty much never have to update it. So that's
Okay.
right.
So I'm gonna put it this way. If you're a Ruby developer and you are working on multiple projects that currently use 2 different versions of Ruby, okay, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions. The first one is, do you really even know what that means? If the answer is no, then install RVM and be very happy. Okay? If the answer is yes, I do know what that means and I care that they're switching, the next question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to use, or are you being recommended by the projects that you're working on, that you use Gemsets? If the answer is yes, and you care, install rbenv and be happy. However, if you are an expert at this, and you've been doing it a long time, and the things that RVM and rbenv do don't sit right with you because of how you like to interact with your shell, then Chruby is here, you can use it, and it will solve the problem of switching your Ruby versions. And I actually think that's it. I actually don't think there's any more discussion. Now, that doesn't mean I won't have more, because I have lots of opinions, but I actually think that's it.
just like I said. So,
Also chime in and say Gemsets are useless.
there you go.
Well, we don't.
I've gotten 3 guest appearances. Anybody else?
I'm kind of curious if other people have had the same experience just from installing RVM on a bunch of Ubuntu machines. About a third of the time, it doesn't work and I can't fix it at all, no matter how hard I try.
I say don't do it.
RVM implode all day.
Yeah, I was I mean, you should have just...
Okay. We're about to get into the big discussion.
I wasn't even going to open that.
That's independent of my question, because some of these were desktops, some of them were production.
Right.
Yeah, I assumed because it was pullover that it was a desktop, but...
Don't assume. You definitely use it in production.
Oh, you definitely shouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, besides that debate, which is not my presentation, which I shouldn't have asked your opinion at all. We'll get to my opinion at this point. So, I like what Brian said. Brian's very true. This is probably too comical of a presentation, poking fun at too many things. But it's definitely a lot of truth comes out of Brian, a lot of truth comes out of all the rest of you guys have concerns. But, like Brian was saying, a lot of it is preference at a certain degree. I know when I started, I was completely happy with RVM. RVM suited most of my needs, if not all of them, until I started poking around with things and maybe getting all hyped up about someone else's opinion on Twitter. But it definitely solved a lot of the problems that I had, which was basic Ruby version management and Gemset creations. But let's say you prefer things to be a little bit more lightweight and you don't like RVM control and everything. That's fine. That's your preference and probably an opinion you have for a while. So you might look at other options like chruby or Chruby, and or rbenv for that matter. And the whole shims and the hooking thing, that was mostly a joke just because I had that slide. But it does add 50 milliseconds of time that you are wasting every day. But besides that, it really comes down to preference. And it's going to be mostly how do you effectively do your job or your hobby or the new skill that you're trying to attain. How are you being the most productive? And I think by starting with one and progressively moving towards others, it's fine. Or if you never move towards others, because the one that you have is meeting your needs in every way, that's going to be just the best way for you. And I think as we're progressing, that's what we're trying to figure out most of the time, is what tools are we using as the best way for us. So the main thing about this presentation is introducing you to how RBM and rbenv works and some of the cool features that they both propose and some of the cool packages that can be added on that you can now attain. And just move forward knowing that there's a couple options out there. If you're not liking one or the other, there's plenty to try. And probably shouldn't complain too much about the whole 50 milliseconds things because you're never going to notice it, but it will keep me up at night. So that is my presentation. And
all right, so
you got 2 minutes for questions if there's any questions.
yeah, does anybody have any questions? I guess we have 2 minutes for questions. Otherwise, we'll hit the break.
Oh, does anyone want to play foosball?